Written by Murphy here. I'm back again for another book review. Today I'm reviewing Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is actually about 100 years old, this particular copy. Treasure Island itself was published in its entirety in 1882. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote a ton of great books. This one was really meant to be a boys' book, and it's extremely popular. It's been made into movies and stories and super amazing book. So I read it for the first time this year and was totally in love with it. I loved it. I thought it was great. I bought this copy for my daughter, who doesn't care, right? Fine. She likes that it's old. She doesn't care about the book itself. The book is about a treasure hunt. It's in the title. They're gonna find treasure. It's on an island. There are pirates. There are battles. There is life at stake. It is good stuff. And Robert Louis Stevenson, he pulls out all this lovely tension. It's great. Oh my gosh, he's got so many characters. I can't even talk about all of them. They're a lot of fun, but I kind of picked out a few. Let me say, yes, this is a story about an adventure, but it is set on the young end of this young man. The main character is Jim, and he doesn't say how old he is. Some people say, oh, he's a teenager. My daughter did get partway through up to this mark, and she thought he was, this is the first half, like maybe, she's not very far in, 5 or 6 chapters. She thought he was a teenager. Wikipedia thinks he's a teenager, but I never thought he was a teenager. I thought he was maybe like 10, because in the very beginning, when he's with his mom, he seems very attached to her. I thought that's kind of a young thing. He's sort of a mature 10-year-old. He's an only child, it appears. And so I thought he's kind of a very youngish, but he does manage to do a lot of kind of smart things. So maybe he's 12. But the reason I mention his age in particular is because this is not a romance. There is no love story in this. And because he's so young, you can kind of get away with it. Isn't this the three, the fabulous triad? Gold, glory, and girls. Women. Women, wealth, and treasure. They didn't have to worry about women. Robert Louis Stevenson's like, don't have to worry about that. I'm going to pick a young guy. Don't have to put that in this story. So he could pull out every other thing. No doubt Mark Twain read this. And certainly Huckleberry Finn did not have a love interest particularly. But here, there's no love interest, with the possible exception of the love for his mother. He was not trying to win any hearts. He was going for the gold and for the adventure. So it was pure, and it was very adventurous. So much at stake. All right. Spoiler, they do find the treasure, right? They have to go out. It's like a mystery, too, because this character shows up, and they end up getting this map. And then they quickly assemble. This is very Victorian. It was written late-ish, middle-late Victorian period. And they were like, yes, they had to get the capital to get together for this boat. So there was a squire who funded the voyage, right? But then this people came together, so they were going to go get this amazing treasure. Very capitalist. So this is part of where the characters come in. All these different characters who have different personalities and play their part. Jim is really important. And the bad guy, Long John Silver. So when you talk about the main character, the hero, and the bad guy, what are we talking about? Better nature and weak nature. This comes up again and again in the story, and this is also very Victorian, especially since this is a boy's story. It has got to have this moral to it. Not like the Victorians weren't big on the morals anyway. So the better nature included being respectful, being honest, being law-abiding. They mentioned a lot of like whether or not you were breaking the law and doing some of these things. Hard-working. This is really important. Also, well, this is shown mostly by the opposite of it. When you are weak, you don't know your place. You don't go by the place you're supposed to hold in society. This is also Victorian. What is your status that you're supposed to maintain? So a weak person drinks. Oh my goodness. Alcohol was all over this book. Yes, they had the rum, and rum clearly caused the first death. So it's bad for you. Stay away from rum. And they are the weak nature. They are lazy. People, the bad guys, the enemies tended to not show up. They were lazy. They were also gluttonous, but they were not loyal. That was part of it. They would switch. So this shows up across the whole novel. Long John Silver had an important part to play throughout the whole thing, and he was very deceptive. He was very cleverly deceptive. He was snake-like in his ability to move around and convince people that he really was on their side. Not loyal. He would switch, turn about really fast, and this caused a lot of confusion. He did fool people at first, and he kept doing it, both sides, whenever it suited him. Evil. Now, Jim was an amazing character because he could do so much. He kind of helped his mom at the beginning, and then he's like, I guess I'll go along and be a cabin boy. Cabin boy. So he's going to be a cabin boy, and he ends up learning a lot about ship work along the way. Thank God, because it turns out he needed all of this cleverness and all this ability as they were going through the trouble. This being a boy story, it's like every wish fulfillment of a boy. So they've got the treasure adventure, they're looking for the treasure, they've got the adventure, but boys love to reenact battles. And there was a part after they get to the treasure island where the bad guys split off and the good guys have to go against one another because it kind of had this mutiny situation. But Jim gets involved and does some major plays. But the thing is, there were like 3 different battle centers. Like there was this group and this group and this group. And he was describing it. Stevenson was describing it so well. I'm like, this is exactly like kids fighting in their different forts. But this is the total wish fulfillment of that kind of adventure. All these things happening. There are a lot of characters, but one of the things I really loved was the character of Ben Gunn. This made me laugh. You know, when I read it the first time, I got to just soak it up and experience it. The second time I was reading for this review, so I was like reading and making sure to grab all the information, which is not as much fun. But when I experienced Ben Gunn for the first time, and this marooned character, and he mentioned Christian food. He said he had not had Christian food. I'm like, oh, that's right. That's an old-fashioned way of saying things, which Victorian English Christian, to say something was Christian was the same thing as saying civilized. Well, so he's like, I haven't had Christian food. I've just had to hunt the goats and eat what I could find, but I really want Christian food. In particular, he wanted cheese. I look differently at cheese now. But to talk about the writing, in addition to the wonderful tension that Stevenson could do. It's great to go back to an older style, not crazy old, still very approachable. The style of describing things. He uses different phrases that have definitely fallen out of fashion. It's wonderful to remember that, and it's even more of an exploration because it's a time capsule into that time. So Stevenson does a great job of bringing in the tension of the moment, but he also describes a lot of little details. Like he'll describe the objects that they're looking at. In the very beginning, they are looking through the chest of the person who has the treasure map, and they describe all of the little things. You're like, oh, those were the things, and you can feel it. You can kind of touch it. You can feel it, which is interesting for a treasure in particular, thinking about treasure, like, oh, you can touch it and sense it. So that was a great way that he brought us along. He also got into the descriptions of sea life, navigating and talking about how the ship works. That was interesting and much more descriptive. He wasn't faking it. It's like, yes, he talked about being before the mast, which means a sailor, not an officer. And they describe these things, that he uses these words which are very true to the time and true to the life of the people that lived it. So I enjoyed that as part of the book. Another character that was really interesting was Dr. Livesey, who was one of the original crew that decided to go on this voyage. He came along as part of this adventure. He was an interesting character because he was a smart one. He was the college-educated one. He also had some sort of place in society. Although doctors weren't like nobility, there really weren't any royal people. There weren't any dukes or anything like that. The highest they got was a squire. Everybody else was ordinary people. Ordinary-ish, right? So Dr. Livesey was a college-educated doctor, and he was very full of strong opinions. He thought of certain things. He was like, knock it off with the rum. And because he was this sophisticated person, he actually had a little stash of cheese, which he felt that he could share with poor Ben Gunn, who hadn't eaten Christian food in so long. Dr. Livesey did do a good job of describing. He had a couple chapters that he narrated, and he was a very interesting character. There were so many characters. I couldn't go into all of them. It's a great book. It is wonderful, well written, not a dull moment. In fact, it's like so full of tension. It's like nearly unbearable. It's nearly unbearable because it's like, oh, and then you thought it was gonna, oh, and then and then we're gonna, oh, but we lost it. And Long John Silver, who is the worst bad guy ever. Oh my gosh, there is no limit to this guy's lack of morals and no conscience. He will do whatever it takes to get this treasure. And he contributed a lot to these reversals along the way. Like, who could be this bad? He's a fabulous bad guy. I enjoyed Treasure Island. I have a new respect for Robert Louis Stevenson. I think I need to read more of his catalog. He's fallen a bit out of favor, but he is delicious. Treasure Island is delicious. Maybe I should go out on an adventure. I'd love to hear what you think. We can continue the conversation.